Good morning, Andrew Crisp, Emergency Management Commissioner. I'm joined this morning here at the State Control Centre with Tim Webush, the Chief Officer from the SES, and Michael Efron, Senior Forecaster from the Bureau of Meteorology. We do still have a major flooding emergency across our state, and we will have for quite some time. At the moment, we have nearly 70 warnings across the state, from the very north to the very south. In terms of where our focus is, and with those warnings, it is very much about the evacuate now orders that are in place at Echuca and also Kerrang. And I encourage people, just don't look at the headline in relation to an emergency warning. Look at the detail in relation to it will provide evacuation routes and where you can go in terms of relief centres. But it's a changing situation that's extremely dynamic, and what we've seen even this morning is a watch and act message go out for the Barwon. So down in the Geelong area, we've also got a watch and act for the Werribee River at the moment. So things are constantly moving across the state. So you need to know how to access good information to make those good decisions. So please download that Vic Emergency app, stay across the Vic Emergency channels. Tim will go into a lot more detail in relation to the current warnings and what they mean for various communities. We have seen significant rainfall over the last couple of days. There was not as much overnight as we saw the night before. However, there was rainfall, 30 mils, that impacted on Rochester overnight. Did not impact in terms of flooding in that particular town, we know, which has been so significantly impacted through this flooding event. But it is the reality that we are going to see more rainfall. And Michael Efron will go into a lot more detail in relation to what we've seen with our weather, what we'll see over the next few days and for the next 7 days. We continue to provide all the support we can to Victorian communities, whether that's through our support agencies, our emergency services, working hand in glove with the community, who have done such an incredible job through this whole emergency. Other organisations have come in to support us. We're coordinating spontaneous volunteers using Disaster Relief Australia. So if you want to volunteer to go into communities impacted by flooding, you can go to Disaster Relief Oz, all one word, .org, and register. And through that coordination, we'll be able to get volunteers on the ground to support various communities that have been impacted. I know there was about 20 volunteers through DRA yesterday in Maribyrnong. There's going to be about 100 working there this morning and throughout today. We still have 7 relief centres supporting communities that have been impacted by flooding. Those numbers have significantly reduced. It's around about 180 at the moment across 7 different relief centres. And again, people that work in relief centres are doing an incredible job. Local government, support agencies, doing whatever they can to support people impacted by this flooding. We do have a significant number, again, of helicopters working across the state in support of communities, including the 2 Chinooks from the ADF. And again, thank the literally hundreds of ADF resources that we've got on the ground supporting this greater effort. We've mentioned many different organisations. We've mentioned the community. I just want a shout out this morning in relation to the people you see behind me. So in the State Control Centre this week, on various days, we've seen 180, 190 people working in here. That's replicated at a regional level and an incident level. So literally hundreds and hundreds of people working behind the scenes, supporting our emergency services and other agencies on the ground so they can do what they need to do. So thanks to all those that are providing that critical support role. I'll now hand over to Michael Efron. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Michael Efron, Senior Meteorologist at the Bureau of Meteorology. So last night, as the Commissioner mentioned, we did see further thunderstorm activity across the state. Near Stawell, we saw around 18 millimetres falling in around 20 minutes, so some fairly significant rainfall there. And also further north near Rochester, around 30 millimetres. So not as extensive or as heavy as what we saw on Friday night. But through the rest of today, further shower and thunderstorm activity is expected, especially through the northwest of the state. Just in the last half an hour, we've seen falls of around 10 to 20 millimetres through parts of the Mallee. So potential for severe thunderstorms in that region through the rest of today and also through parts of northeastern Victoria this afternoon. But overnight Sunday into Monday, we are expecting that rainfall to extend further south and become more extensive. So I think throughout Monday, rainfall totals of 15 to 30 millimetres expected across much of northern and western Victoria, so falling on those already very wet catchments. The further south and east you head, fall's only likely to be around 5 to 15 millimetres. As we head into Tuesday, that rainfall does contract to southern and eastern districts and then clears throughout the day. And then we're in for a period of fairly settled conditions Wednesday through to Friday, with just a few showers each day near and south of the Dividing Range. Next Saturday looks really settled with dry conditions across the state. So after Tuesday's rainfall, a period of fairly settled weather across Victoria. I'll hand over to Tim. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, and good morning, everybody. I guess in good news this morning, whilst we're continuing to see this flood emergency evolve in various parts of the state, we have now seen a peak on the Loddon River at Kerrang of 77.97 metres, so just below that 78 metre mark that was being forecast for this event. Having said that, water levels have only slightly receded now to around 77.84 metres, and the indications are that we could see flood levels in that 77.7 to 77.8 region for quite a number of days. So Kerrang will continue to be isolated in the main for that period of time. We've also seen in and around the Kerrang area a breach of one of the levees with a slight influx of water into the southwest corner, impacting around caravan parks, the industrial area, and around 20 homes in that space. But for the broader part of Kerrang, at this stage, high and dry. On the Rochester front, with the Campaspe River, again, we saw that peak occur last weekend. We're now back at minor flood levels. The community is preparing. If we do see this upper end rainfall, we could see renewed rises there, particularly at the upper end of moderate, potentially at the low end of major flooding. And if it did get to that major flood level, it would potentially be somewhere in the range of 114.6 to 114.9 metres, which is quite a bit lower than what we saw in the most recent event, but could impact again around 50 properties if we do see that upper end rainfall, and we'd be seeing that in the early parts of this coming week. Similarly, at Echuca, the Campaspe River remains at moderate flood level and will continue to be quite high at that level given the convergence with the Murray River, and so the waters coming out of the Campaspe being backed up by the Murray River peak as well. So we are still advising residents around Echuca. There are a number of road closures, but we still have access to Echuca at this time for supply chains. The key focus then is obviously the Murray River at Echuca, where we're currently seeing a level of 94.83 metres and continuing to see a forecast peak of around 95 metres overnight tonight into tomorrow. So it is still slowly rising. Again, last night we saw in and around Echuca village 20 homes need to be door knocked as we saw some seepage through the levee there, and we're advising people again that an evacuation message is still current. We can't emphasise enough that those levees, whilst they're holding at this point in time, do continue to be a vulnerability for that particular community, and our advice is to evacuate rather than becoming isolated or impacted in that area. Downstream, we're then going to see that flooding occur around Turrumbry and all the way through to Barmer, where we could see major flooding levels being reached on Wednesday and Thursday this week, higher than both the 1993 and the 2016 flood levels. So again, we're advising people check that warning now, understand your risk in those local areas and also what it means for road closures. At Swan Hill, we've now got a forecast from the Bureau that indicates that we could see major flood level being reached around that first week of November. The major flood level is 4.7 metres there. It may go a little bit higher than that once peaks are seen downstream from Turrumbry onwards. And that would put a flood peak above what we saw in the 1993 floods in that area. So again, alerting the community around Swan Hill, now is the time to be prepared, but we do have a little bit more time yet before we will see potentially those major flood waters. Back in and around Shepparton and Mooroopna, we're currently back at the minor flood level in some parts, but we are expecting with this renewed rainfall over the coming days that we could see river levels rise again in and around Shepparton and Mooroopna, most likely to the moderate flood level, but we could see again a low-level major flood go through there around the 11 to 11.1 metres if we see the upper end rainfall. Again, that'll be significantly different to what we saw most recently, where it reached 12.05 metres in that community. This morning we also saw in the early hours a moderate flood warning issued on the Barwon River for Geelong, where again some local roads will be cut, caravan park access and the like will become restricted, and a range of recreation reserves that will also again be inundated by floodwaters, similar to what we saw around a week ago through that area. Again, please check the warning. It is a watch and act, and stay attuned to your local emergency broadcasters. And finally, in and around metropolitan Melbourne, the Werribee River is now starting to recede from what was a minor flood level reached there with the recent rainfall, and also as we have seen on the Yarra River, where we're continuing to see minor flooding in some parts. However, we've still got the further rainfall to come over the next 24 to 48 hours, so we could see renewed rises on some of those metropolitan catchments. Right across the state, we've now seen over 8,700 requests for assistance to emergency services, 750 water rescues. Our messages remain clear. Please do not attempt to drive through flash flood waters. It could be the last decision you make. Make sure you are accessing your emergency information through the Vic Emergency app or the website emergency.vic.gov.au, or through our 1800 number, which is 1800 226 226. We're happy to take questions.
Maybe for you, Tim, with those more settled conditions coming next weekend, does that mean the end is in sight for some areas?
Look, certainly it'll mean that we won't see the sort of flood levels that we saw a week ago, where we saw towns significantly impacted by that really quite significant rainfall totals. The rainfall totals we're likely to see in this event are a little bit more isolated in the last 24 to 48 hours, but we are expecting a broader rain band, as Michael's indicated, over the next 24 hours. So it's really, again, how much we see, but we're certainly not going to see the totals that we saw in the previous event.
How confident are you that the peak in the Murray will occur tonight? Because locals there are obviously getting frustrated by the moving timeline and the uncertainty.
Look, at Echuca, the Murray River is one of the most challenging hydrological areas to model because of the inflows that come from the Broken, the Goulburn, and also the Campaspe River, along with the Murray flows out of the dams at Coburn and also at the Hume Dam itself. So that is part of the challenge with the Murray River, is the many inflows. At this stage, the advice still remains that we would see a peak overnight tonight and through tomorrow.
And those levees, do you have any update on the engineers that were inspecting those levees? Does it look like they're holding up? And what's the worst case scenario there if they do break?
Look, certainly in and around Echuca, there's two types of levees there at the moment. There's the existing permanent levees that, again, we have seen some overtopping of in recent times, but they've been checked by engineers and are still remaining structurally sound at this point of time. And the temporary levee that has been built, that 3 kilometre temporary levee, is still remaining structurally sound at this point in time. But again, levees are always a first line of mitigation. We can't always guarantee that they will hold in all types of scenarios, and hence why we have an evacuation message out at the moment advising people to leave that area until we can deem it safe. But always we're hopeful that they will continue to hold around what they've been designed to mitigate against.
You spoke about it a little bit before, but can you just tell us again about Kerrang? What's the situation there, and should people be leaving there? You said that it was actually looking quite good.
Yes, Kerrang has peaked for the first time, which is at that 77.97 metres, which was just under the forecast height of 78 metres. But it is going to remain steady now between that 77.7 and 77.8 level. It's currently at 77.84 metres, and that's going to be for several days. So Kerrang is still largely isolated from all the major transport routes and the like and is going to continue to be that way, particularly with this additional rainfall. It'll keep that peak up at that level for at least another 5 to 7 days.
Is Kerrang one of those communities that is being accessed by a lot of helicopters and all that emergency services dropping off supplies by air, that sort of thing?
Look, we've been able to supply into Kerrang early. We knew that the town was going to be isolated, so local services and shops and the like have stocked up, ready for a 7-day isolation. We still have a local road access in there at the moment, but we're advising the general public that Kerrang is generally not accessible. But for locals, there are supplies there. We have helicopters on standby should we need to continue any resupply into those locations.
Of those 8,700 requests for assistance, how many of those roughly are people that have been told to evacuate that have ignored those warnings?
So we've seen just over 750 rescues over the last 7 to 10 days, and around 300 of those have been for people that have remained in their properties and chose, for whatever reason, not to evacuate when those warnings were current. So again, 4 areas that do see evacuation messages, like we see it at Echuca right now, or communities that may become impacted in the coming weeks. Our strongest advice is to leave that area for the period of time whilst those major peaks are going through, rather than being either isolated and needing support or needing to be rescued in the worst case scenario.
Does it surprise you that people are still staying despite seeing what's happening elsewhere?
Look, I guess there's a whole host of reasons why people choose to stay, whether they perceive the risk to be as much as we're saying it would be, but also I think Australians are generally used to water. We grow up around our beaches and our rivers and our lakes, and we don't seem to be as perhaps afraid of water as we might be, say, fire or other hazards. So again, when we see these forecasts at major heights that does put inundation around communities, our strongest advice when those evacuation messages are up is to leave.
There's also a sense, especially in places like Echuca, of the wanting to stay and protect their properties and do everything they can to try and stop the water. Are you saying that people shouldn't be doing that, should leave? Or
There's a point in time where certainly doing mitigations around people's properties is absolutely worthwhile, whether it's sandbagging the front or rear doors, whether it's, as we say, bag it, block it, lift it, but the last part of our message is leave. And so the bag it is the doors at the front and the back, the block it is the shower drains, the toilets, those type of things with sandbags. But once you've done that preparation, where there's an evacuation message, our message is to leave that area.
do you have any updates on Victorians without power? I know there were some power outages yesterday.
Yeah, look, at this stage there's very low numbers of power outages associated with the current flood emergency itself. There's obviously isolated outages on a daily basis across Victoria for a whole host of reasons, but the numbers are literally in the handfuls at the moment related to the flood impacts itself.
Do you know how many people in Kerrang are going to be isolated or are currently isolated?
Yeah, look, we believe around 50 to 60% of the community have remained in Kerrang because of the levee wall, and it's a community of around 3,000 people, and so that gives you an indication of the sort of numbers that still remain at Kerrang at this time.
Do you have those sort of numbers for the Echuca region as well?
Look, across Echuca, obviously a much larger community. The area that we've asked to evacuate in particular relates to 250 properties in and around Echuca village. So again, you're talking in the order of perhaps 500 to 700 people in that area.
Next weekend is potentially going to be people taking a long weekend. What's your advice to people that might be planning to travel to those areas?
Look, our advice as we come towards the long weekend is to have a really good look at the Vic Emergency website or the Vic Emergency app and understand what hazards still remain. There will be parts of Victoria that are absolutely open for business next weekend. There are going to be parts of Victoria that are still going to be flood prone next weekend, and roads will still be closed. We'll have further information as we come into the middle part of this week as to where parks or forests and some of those locations may still be impacted and may not be trafficable, but certainly there'll be many parts of our state that are very much open for the long weekend.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.